Mobile Suit Save Point.
The first time I heard the term Dragoon, I was almost sure I had heard the word wrong. It was a concept completely foreign to me as a kid, and I had no idea what it meant, or if it was a noun or a name or what. I guess that question lingered, because I've always wondered what exactly a Dragoon was. I mean, I think I could pick one out of a lineup of JRPG classes, but I never really knew how the idea came about, or why the class or title is so prevalent in the Japanese video games I enjoyed so much. If you ever wondered about that too, or you just enjoy odd and hyper-specific videos like this the same way I do, then load up alongside me as we explore the concept of Dragoons and JRPG gaming. My first experience with Dragoons was with the 2000 release The Legend of Dragoon on the PlayStation. Two of my close friends, brothers who lived up the block from me, had called my house, on the house phone of course, exclaiming that this new RPG they were playing was way better than any of the Final Fantasy games we liked at the time, and how this game sported 4 discs. Okay, so what's the game called? The Legend of Dragoon, they said into the phone together. The Legend of what? I said. Regardless of the name of this new game, they hooked me with their sell of it. I liked Final Fantasy VII a lot, but I really fell in love with the series after playing the Final Fantasy VIII demo on the now legendary Pizza Hut demo disc.
Get ready to test your kart racing skills with Crash Bandicoot. Fight an ape army to save the human race, adventure along with a young military cadet, grind asphalt as Tony Hawk, or blaze down a mountain on your fat snowboard. And don't stop there! Head back to Pizza Hut and buy another stuffed crust pizza. You'll get another demo disc filled with more of the best PlayStation games, including Gran Turismo 2, Spyro 2, Riptos Rage, Tomb Raider 4, Sledstorm, and the next Tetris. Plus, you'll get another chance to win $500,000.
Squall just had this badass heroic look, like a JRPG version of Antonio Banderas from Desperado.
Missed me!
And he carried one of the coolest weapons of all time, a giant gunblade. And I know the focus of this video is on Dragoons and JRPG video games, but after mentioning that Pizza Hut demo disc, I'd be remiss if I didn't show that demo and its era of gaming a little extra love. That Pizza Hut demo disc is probably one of the most memorable demo discs of that era, and it's learning things like that today that really make me look back so fondly on my childhood. Because I had it. I owned that game, that demo. I owned it. I had it. And I didn't think much of it other than how much fun it was to play. A lot of people just call it the Pizza Hut sampler now, but for me, it was actually my first experience with Final Fantasy VIII. Before I ever owned the full game, this little promotional disc was basically my entire connection to it. It came out in 1999 for the PlayStation as part of a promotion with Pizza Hut. What a time to be alive. And it included a playable version of the Dolet mission from Final Fantasy VIII. But what's interesting is how different it was from the final game. Rinoa is in your party way earlier than she's supposed to be. Some of the dialogue is a little rougher, and the whole thing has this slightly unfinished feeling to it that makes it feel really unique nowadays. I also remember it being really hard to beat, but maybe that was just me because I was like 8 or 9 at the time. The disc also had demos for games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Spyro 2, Riptos Rage, Ape Escape, and A Bug's Life, which honestly is low-key underrated. It really felt like this weird little snapshot of 1999 PlayStation culture. And now, all these years later, the discs kind of become a collector's item. And honestly, I mostly just remember replaying that Final Fantasy VIII demo over and over again. It was probably the thing that started my love for the series in the first place. Okay, now, where was I before I went down that nostalgia road? Alright, that's right, The Legend of Dragoon, and my first time cracking open that insane 4-disc case. Okay, so, when I finally got to my friend's house, after they had told me about the game later that night, they already had hours poured into the game, and I got to see the magical transformation of the main character, Dartfeld, into a Dragoon, becoming one with a red dragon, infusing himself with its magic and strength, his body suddenly adorned with dragon armor, and wings now sprouting from his back. So this is a Dragoon, I thought to myself. Right? Well, yeah. In the world of that game, anyway. The Legend of Dragoon was developed and published by Sony Computer Entertainment, released between 1999 and 2001, depending on where you were. It's set in a fantasy world called Endiness, and it follows Dart and a group of characters trying to stop a world-ending threat. Combat is mostly turn-based, but it adds this timing system called additions, where you press buttons during attacks to keep them going. It's one of my favorite combat systems in all of gaming. And then there's the Dragoon system, where characters transform, grow wings, and gain access to stronger attacks and magic. The game had a pretty long development cycle. It started around 1996 and took about 3 years to finish, eventually growing into a much bigger project than originally planned. The team ended up being over 100 people, with a budget of more than $16 million, which was pretty large for that time. It was produced by Shuhei Yoshida and directed by Yasuyuki Hasabe, and the goal was to create something more cinematic, something that could stand alongside games like Final Fantasy. You can see that in the pre-rendered backgrounds, the CGI cutscenes, and even the fact that it shipped on 4 discs. When it finally came out, the reception was a bit mixed, but generally positive. A lot of reviews compared it to the Final Fantasy series, which I guess was the goal. Sometimes a little unfairly it got that comparison though, but people still pointed out the visuals and the combat system as strong points. Over time though, it's become one of those games people look back on as a bit underrated. It also did pretty well commercially, selling over 1 million copies worldwide, with a lot of that success coming right here in North America. I don't know about you, but The Legend of Dragoon was the first, and for a long time, the only concept of Dragoons that I had. However, this isn't the game that introduced Dragoons into the JRPG atmosphere. Not even close. That achievement belongs to Final Fantasy II. That 1988 sequel to the original Final Fantasy for the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, introduced the first Dragoon, Rickard Highwind. According to his wiki page, he's the last surviving Dragoon from Diced, and the first Dragoon introduced in the Final Fantasy series. Dragoons went on to become one of the staple jobs in the series, with many taking on the Highwind name. The Dragoon role, or job in Final Fantasy, is basically just a dragon knight, known for wielding spears or lances, sometimes dark or dragon-scaled armor, and most importantly, utilizing jump mechanics or aerial attacks, allowing them to swoop down from on high like the dragons they're so synonymous with, to inflict high damage on their foes. It's actually kind of interesting because, from what I understand, the word Dragoon isn't even what Rickard or what those class of characters was originally called. In the original Japanese translation, they were just Dragon Knights. That's what it's always been over there. But when Final Fantasy IV came out over here in the West, and they introduced Cain Highwind, they for some reason changed the term to Dragoon with that initial English translation. And that name just stuck. Even when they went back to earlier games like Final Fantasy II, characters like Rickard Highwind started getting called a Dragoon too. Even though back then, it wasn't really the same thing yet. But that's translations for you. No big jumps, no disappearing into the sky, just a knight connected to dragons. And the word Dragoon itself is a little strange to me, because in real life, A Dragoon wasn't anything like this. Real-life Dragoons were a specific type of soldier, mounted infantry or cavalry. But I really love stuff like that. For whatever reason, somewhere along the way, JRPGs just turned it into something else. Something completely different, but also much cooler. Something that actually feels like it belongs in the sky. You know what else belongs in the sky? Dragons. And Dragoons too. Alright. Admittedly, that was a terrible transition, I know. But there is another game that heavily featured Dragoons and took the concept in a different direction than both the Final Fantasy series and Legend of Dragoon. And that's a series of games known as Panzer Dragoon on the infamous Sega Saturn.
Sega's next-generation gaming platform, revolutionary sports and arcade gameplay, all with amazing new 3D experiences never before possible on home game systems. Wow.
The Sega Saturn stood out at a time when the gaming industry was rapidly moving toward 3D graphics, mainly because it was still incredibly strong when it came to 2D games and arcade-style experiences. It became known for impressive home versions of arcade titles like Virtua Fighter 2 and lesser-known games that later became cult classics like Nights into Dreams, which was really smooth and detailed for the time. I'm still not exactly sure what happened and why that system never took off, but from what I've read online in preparation for this topic, the Saturn was notoriously difficult to develop for due to its complicated dual CPU hardware system. But for those few developers who learned how to use it properly, they were able to create some really visually impressive games some might say were way ahead of their time. And over the years, the Saturn also built a reputation for having a library of unique and experimental titles, especially in Japan. While the first two Panzer Dragoon games were like traditional Japanese rail shooters, the most popular game in that series is Panzer Dragoon Saga, which fits the mold of a classic JRPG. Panzer Dragoon Saga follows a mercenary named Edge, who travels through a strange world on the back of a dragon and ends up meeting a mysterious girl connected to an ancient civilization. I'm trying to keep things high level here in case you're going to play it later, but I don't know. Sega saw the game as an important RPG for competing with the growing popularity of the PlayStation and games like Final Fantasy VII, so development started in 1995 along its predecessor Panzer Dragoon II, Zui. The project became extremely difficult due to how ambitious it was for the time, combining RPG mechanics with full 3D graphics, voice acting, and the series' signature flying Dragoon combat on the Sega Saturn. The development was stressful, heavily delayed, and even marked by tragedy, with 2 staff members reportedly passing away during production. I can't tell if that's completely true or not, but that's what I was reading for this video. So when the game finally released in 1998, it received critical praise for its story, atmosphere, visuals, and combat system, and many people still consider it one of the best games on the Saturn. But commercially, it struggled. Sega barely marketed it in the West, and only released a small number of copies since the company had already started shifting focus toward the Dreamcast, my all-time favorite system. Over time, the game became more of a cult classic, especially because it was never released, and original English copies eventually became extremely rare and expensive. Over time, the game became more of a cult classic, especially because it was never re-released, and original English copies eventually became extremely rare and expensive. The earlier Final Fantasy style Dragoons were usually armored warriors tied to dragons through combat, jumping attacks, and military imagery, but Panzer Dragoon changes that relationship completely. Instead of becoming a Dragoon-like figure through armor or powers, the main character is physically connected to the dragon itself, traveling with it, fighting alongside it, and depending on it for survival. The game still carries a lot of the themes associated with Dragoons though. There's still this idea of humans and dragons being linked together, flight being important, and combat feeling elevated or almost spiritual compared to regular ground battles. The dragon isn't just a mount or weapon either. It's something mysterious and ancient. It gives the game a very different tone from something like Final Fantasy or The Legend of Dragoon, but still taps into the same core fantasy that makes the Dragoon archetype so memorable in JRPGs. Listen, I know this was kind of a random video subject, but I hope that if you were strong enough to make it here to the end, that you really enjoyed the content. Take care.